What's going on, Soul Tribe? And welcome to Alchemist astrology. Justin here, and bringing another little nugget to add to the Soul Tribe archive. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the North Node in Cancer in the 12th house. And this could be a bit of a tricky one anything that falls in the 12th house. But before we get into that, let's talk about the North Node. Now, when you talk about the nodes, when we're talking about the north node, we're always going to be, of course, talking about the south node as well because they're always directly opposite from one another. And one of the more kind of modern sort of takes on the nodes is that where the south node, you can look at it as where you're coming from, the kind of areas in your life that you've had challenges with or things where you can get wisdom from. The north node is where you're going. This is getting you out of that comfort zone, going into uncharted territories. The North Node was known as the dragon's head, and so I think about it as always that kind of looking forward. What's next? What's to come? And that's not always the easiest when we're talking with the nodes. So this is the thing that kind of gets us, kind of projecting us forward in a sense. Now, another more sort of like an ancient sort of, or more kind of Hellenistic term for the North Node, it's also known as like the ascending node. And it was thought that with the ascending node, especially if there were planets around it, there's this idea of increase when we're talking with, especially with the North Node here. So this could even be wherever the North Node is tends to increase. Maybe the themes are kind of the focus around that house in your chart. That could be another way to kind of look at that. And then that gives you to where paying attention to any planets that are around it, especially like benefics or malefics, because they're going to coat that or color that a bit more. So those would be just some basic things when we're talking about with the nodes. Now, when you get into the sign of Cancer, they are ruled by the moon, good old moon, and they're the cardinal water sign, and then they're one of the nocturnal signs. So there's this receptive quality or feminine quality to the Cancerian energy. And the moon deals with like the fluctuations, the changes, how the winds of fortune are just, it's 1 minute we're up, 1 minute we're down. And I think the Cancerian energy very closely mimics that, and especially in the sense of like emotions, how the feelings are, 1 minute we're feeling good, 1 minute we're feeling meh, the other we're feeling like blah, just like on all the shades in that. And I think that there's a really strong relationship with Cancer in the body, because a lot of that comes to the things that you're feeling. The body's the receptor of that. That's where we're getting all of the initial sort of signals, for these different feelings, whether I'm feeling too hot, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling in a mood, that's going to be the Cancerian energy. But there's a strong nurturing quality with Cancer, and I think that that's something really nice that comes through with having the moon as its ruler, that idea of just nurturing and nourishment and just the growing things and taking care. I think there's a strong sensibility and just like in intuitive sense when we're talking with Cancer, just being able to pick up on what other people need. It's a real strong trait, I think, with the Cancer energy, when I'm just talking about Cancer in general. Now, when we talk about the 12th house, this is one of the Caden houses, and it was known in Hellenistic astrology as the house of bad spirit, so it's all right. And I like to preface too, when I'm talking about these, especially these more sort of like harder themed houses. I have my son here, so it's like I understand the themes of this 12th house pretty well. It's things that I think about quite a bit, so I don't speak on these houses lightly. But some of the themes that the house or that the 12th house covers are going to deal with, like, especially like in ancient terms, it can deal with like foreign lands. It can deal with like hostilities or enemies. It can get into, it's one of the kind of like what I would call like one of the health houses, because it can deal with like injuries and sickness. It can deal with even death can be something that comes, or that idea of loss, that comes in with the 12th house. But it mentioned like disease, especially kind of like chronic things. This was where Saturn found its joy. So you get that idea of kind of like long-term illnesses, especially, and even thinking in the terms of like enemies and things that could be more of even like a hidden sort of enemies, but just that sort of enemies in general. Tribunals was another thing, another little Hellenistic term, so getting that ideas of like courts of justice and things like that, so even getting a little bit of like legal matters and things that can get into the 12th house as well. Now, when you're working with this placement, just a couple things to consider. You would have a Leo rising by whole sign, and all you're gonna have to really do is look to the moon, because the moon is going to be in charge of this house, and the condition of that moon is really going to help shape how this house is functioning. And especially if you have any planets in here as well, like I was talking about earlier. Now, just kind of like combining all of those places here in general, one really kind of important thing to think about with the nodes too is that their primary function was just like as the indicators of where the eclipses fall. You know, so when you are going, when the nodes are, transiting through Cancer and Capricorn, whether it be, at how it is for you natally or even in the reverse, those eclipses in those houses are going to be, more active for you. That could be something to kind of pay attention to. Those could be really some bigger themes that are taking place whenever the nodes happen to be transiting through those placements. So there may be changes in like your health, for example, maybe with like that sixth house, 12th house, maybe there's something that changes in like employments or something, or maybe something, if not like a personal health, maybe the health of someone else. Again, those eclipses can be kind of sudden things. And when we're talking those 12th house, 6th house themes, there could be like maybe just, and then not to say this is always the instance, but that's just sort of like, yeah, those just kind of like surprise news, when you hear that someone has gotten like an illness, or, that someone had to maybe passed on and things like that. And I think the important thing with these 12th house themes too is how we take care of ourselves in those times. Because one thing I find, when you think about it as like a guiding light, it's not that you're going towards like, sickness and illnesses and things like that, but that may be something that you have experienced in life, whether it was to taking care of someone or needing to take care of yourself. And you think about those energies of the sixth house, like how you do those kind of regular themes and you can pass those on to others. That's one way I see a lot of the times when you have those like kind of sixth house or 12th house placements, there's that wanting to alleviate that suffering and things for other people. So maybe you get involved in something, where I was talking about with like the courts, for example, maybe happen to help people who are just, maybe happen to come into a bit of bad luck, or come across, whatever that might look like, come sort of like trial or things like that. This could be where maybe you happen to work in like hospital work, or maybe even like talking about foreign lands, maybe you do something like a Doctors Without Borders, or maybe you happen to do something where you're traveling with the military, possibly like some sort of like being in charge in like the medical field, as long as those lines. But I could see that, and then it could be a number of ways, whether you're doing like with things with like the body, in some more ways, or if you're doing more with like kind of like mental health, that could be another way that translates. Maybe something like physical therapy, some sort of like holistic kind of practice. Maybe you have something where you're hosting retreats possibly, and that would be something too. It's not just like just giving, all the time. I think that, and I think that's something with Cancer. I think Cancer energy has that tendency to want to nurture everything around them, but sometimes in that will neglect their own body. And so I think that that's something to always make sure that there's that reciprocity there, that you're giving to yourself just as much you give to others, because it's hard to take care of yourself when you're not feeling in tip-top shape. So, and I know some people might feel that, but that may create some enemies, some hostilities from time to time. But that's just the nature of, the nature of things. We can't be everything to everyone all the time. So I think that is just having those healthy boundaries to when you're taking on that type of stuff. Especially, I think, when we're talking with like water placements, there can be that porousness, I think, that comes with water. That can be more susceptible to the plights and the pains and things of others. To really feel that, that level of empathy. So I think that's something to just kind of pay attention to, especially maybe if you're dealing with, but just to deal with things as far as like burnout and whatnot, but also to, having someone to talk with about these sort of things, because that can be heavy dealing with, especially if you're working in like healthcare, for example, seeing the plights and things of people. That's tough, and I think that builds on people for a long time. If you don't have an outlet, or like a healthy outlet to get that out, then I think that it can, it'll just come back to bite us in the end. Then it turns into like injuries and things, and then we have to deal with it. So that's just something I think that can, one thing to think about, or actually a few things to think about with this placement here. I would also pay attention to, like I said, if you have any planets there, especially the luminaries, if you're born, pretty close to it in eclipse. Because again, those eclipses may work more personally with you, especially if those signs are activated that year and there happen to be eclipses going through there. So that would be another thing that I would consider, but even too, like, maybe taking, I could see this placement as someone who maybe need to take some time to get away, where you find yourself like doing a lot of work and things, and then taking like the occasional trip somewhere, whether it's going off in the forest or going to like an ashram or whatever that happens, to go on some sort of retreat. I think that could be very beneficial for this placement. And I think too, yeah, just like I think being able to be, being able to be in the body, to be able to have those times of isolation and just like to kind of process those things, I think are really important, especially for like 12th house placements in particular. 12th house, and then probably to another degree, like 4th house placements and things. But yeah, I think that's another thing to kind of think about with the nodes. And that may even be something too where if you notice that this theme is harder, like I was saying, if you have maybe like a malefic here, let's say Saturn or Mars happens to be here, and then you got the nodes, especially if they're conjunction, that may exacerbate the kind of more negative qualities of that, where conversely if you have like, let's say, Venus or Jupiter there, you could see where that the more positive qualities of that house are really kind of showing up there. So that could even be some just kind of personal notes to take and kind of observe how that comes up for you as you're dealing with these different placements here. But those would be just some kind of like some base themes that I would talk about with someone with this placement. You definitely need the whole chart to get an idea of how these planets may be showing up for you. But if you have this placement or know someone who's working with this placement, you feel comfortable talking about this, because 12th house things aren't always the funnest to talk about. But I do think that if you're doing something where you're doing some good work, kind of helping people out, trying to do those things, down in the comment section, let us know how that's shown up for you, if you feel comfortable, and how you've gotten through those challenges, or maybe even helped other people process through those challenges. I could see again like physical therapy, any sort of like kind of like health related theme. I could see coming up with that. We're working maybe in like prisons, hospitals, whatever that might be looking like. Maybe working as like a death doula. That could be another thing that could show up with this. One aspect I could see showing up with this placement. But and if this is something where if you want to get to understand like the placements that you have, whether it's this or any points of your chart, down in the description box I have a link to book a consultation with me, so definitely check that out. And if you have any questions as far as the services that I provide, my email's down there as well. There's also a couple of links down there. One's for my Patreon page, and that includes a couple of tiers. One of them will get you access to the Lucky Day podcast, where I do a monthly podcast or monthly show talking about the most auspicious dates and for whatever endeavor that you're initiating. And then the second one will give you access with that. Plus, it'll give you a personalized transit report from me. And who doesn't want that? It's the next best thing to a reading. So that's something that you want, that's available for you. There's also a couple playlists for the other sort of segments that I do in this channel. One of them is Celestial News Monthly, talking about where the sun and the other classical planets are transiting, what signs are going to be most affected, and how to most practically work with those energies. And then the other one is the Lunar Shenanigans, which talks about the astrology of the moon. Same thing, what sign it's in, what phase it's in, when it happens to go void of course, a little more with the moon, and when it happens to go void of course, and again, just to get a general feel of the energies each week as we kind of navigate this stuff. So all sorts of goodies down there for you to check out. But until next time, stay mindful out there, keep raising that vibration through the roof, and I will catch you on the next one later.